Lingsha is our newest sustain unit and she has some big shoes to fill. In this video, we're going to mainly focus on what everyone is talking about with Lingsha, and that's going to be how worth she is over our already amazing and free-to-play friendly 4-star King of Break sustain, Gallagher. Now before we get into that, Lingsha is a new character and we do need to understand her kit to compare her to Gallagher. So we're going to go over that right now. Quick disclaimer, this is based on pre-release information because I am recording this before Lingsha is out, so some of this stuff may be changed. If something big does change on release, I'll leave it in a pinned comment. If you already know what she does, feel free to skip ahead as well, as I've timestamped the video. For her basic attack, it is a normal basic attack. However, her A4 talent makes it that you get 10 extra energy when you use it. This is actually very impactful, as this means your energy rotations don't depend on a specific amount of skills or basics, as they are both giving the same amount of energy now. Now we're going to skip to her talent to understand the rest of her kit. Lingsha has a summon called Fuyan, which is this little bunny thing. Unlike Lightning Lord and Numby, Fuyan needs to be summoned, and this is done by pressing Lingsha's skill or using her technique before battle. Once Fuyan is summoned, it has 90 speed and an initial action count of 3. The max action count it can have is 5, and Fuyan will disappear if their action count reaches 0 or Lingsha dies in combat. Now when Lingsha uses her skill, this action count increases by 3. Now when Fuyan does take action, a follow-up attack is launched, where it attacks all the enemies and the damage is scaled off Lingsha's attack. One enemy will also get additionally attacked, and Fuyan will prioritize enemies that are non-weakness broken and have fire weakness on them. When this follow-up attack is done, Lingsha heals all allies based on her attack and applies a full AoE dispel on all allies. Let's go back to her skill. It's just another fully AoE attack that does damage based on Lingsha's attack and at the same time heals allies. This also advances Fuyan by 20%, and like we mentioned before, it gives Fuyan 3 action counts. Her ultimate inflicts her break debuff, which is called Befogged, which makes them take 25% increased break damage, which lasts for 2 turns. At the same time, there is a fire damage hit, which attacks all enemies and restores HP of allies. This also advances Fuyan 100%, which means you'll be getting an extra heal, attack, and dispel. For her major traces, A2 just gives her extra attack and healing bonus based on her break effect, which can cap out at 50% and 20% healing bonus. Her A4 trace, we already mentioned, gives her the extra energy on her basic attack, and finally her A6. This basically gives Lingsha an additional emergency heal on top of her ult. When Fuyan is on the field and an ally takes damage to the point where they drop below 60% HP, Fuyan will immediately launch her attack from the talent. This attack will, just like in the talent, heal and dispel the whole team. Now this emergency attack will not consume Fuyan's action count and cannot happen for 2 turns after it's been triggered. If you are playing Lingsha with Firefly, this will get triggered as soon as Firefly presses E in her unenhanced state. And finally, Lingsha's technique. After using her technique, she immediately summons Fuyan at the start of battle and afflicts her break debuff on all enemies that lasts for 2 turns. This is not an enter combat technique like Gallagher, which is very useful since you do want to be entering combat with Firefly's technique if you're playing them together. Now, let's get into what you came for, which is how does Lingsha compare to Gallagher? Let's start with overall healing. Lingsha is going to come out on top in this category. Pretty much everything she does heals. Her ult is a heal and also 100% advance for Fuyan. Her skill is a similar idea, has a heal but also advances Fuyan. And then Fuyan itself is another heal, but also a team-wide dispel, which can be extremely useful in certain fights. Gallagher, on the other hand, does also have great healing, as his skill basically heals anyone you use it to full HP, and his debuff makes it that everyone heals themselves when they attack, and his enhanced basic also heals a decent amount. Compared to Lingsha though, he does fall behind. One thing that is very important to note is that this isn't as big of a W as it seems for Lingsha, in break teams at least. Ranmei and break itself are putting in a lot of work at keeping enemies from attacking, which means the extra healing from Lingsha isn't really necessary that much of the time. In other teams though, this is a pretty good advantage for Lingsha. Let's talk about damage. In terms of the break debuff, so team damage, Lingsha just strictly has a better one with a higher multiplier. For personal damage, both of them will be mostly outputting through super break. Lingsha does have a crit build that I have seen some people mess around with, so there is some potential there, but we're going to mainly focus on the super break. In single target situations, there actually pretty similar. Gallagher's enhanced basic can do absurd amounts of damage when there's just one enemy, but in AoE, Lingsha is going to win. Lingsha is basically a erudition character in disguise, as every attack she has except for her basic is fully AoE. So in scenarios where there are a lot of enemies, whether you need her to help in breaking their weakness or just do super break damage, Lingsha comes out on top. This is especially important in pure fiction. Firefly wasn't bad before in pure fiction, but usually you had to pair her with Himiko to help out with AoE clearing. But now with Lingsha can actually take the spotlight with clearing waves, and you can just play the premium Firefly team. Lingsha's damage also does depend on skill points, as the more you can use her skill, the more damage she can do, which actually just brings us to our next point, which is skill point generation. Gallagher wins here without a doubt. Gallagher still is, out of our sustains, the best skill point generator, with his ult giving him a full advance forward and him rarely needing to press his skill. In that same vein, if you slap him with quid pro quo, he becomes a budget energy buffer for the team as well. Lingsha isn't skill point negative, but she definitely isn't generating as much as Gallagher, and especially in the Firefly team, which can struggle with skill points at time, it can be a bit harder to play around. If we're just focusing on keeping Furan on the field, Lingsha only has to press her skill every so often just to increase the action count. But if you want to press her skill for extra break damage, or some super break to finish off weaker enemies, or just some extra healing, then you'll have to manage your skill points a bit more carefully. If you are an E1 Firefly haver, then you don't really need to worry about this at all, since Firefly's skills no longer use skill points. Let's move to versatility. As a generic sustain, they both are pretty versatile. Gallagher is pretty decent in Acheron teams, as his ult debuff helps stack Acheron's ult. Lingsha herself is a new really good sustain for follow-up teams. She isn't going to be as good as Aventurine, but her own follow-up and attack scaling is going to take advantage of buffs from Robin, as well as help Fei Xiao build her ult with Lingsha's constant attacks. Taking both of them outside break, I would say Lingsha is slightly better. She is more comfortable to play around with better healing and more dispels, and she has potential with Furan being both a follow-up and a summon, which seems to be a new thing Hoyo is experimenting with. The skill point thing is mostly fine for Lingsha, she just won't be as good with skill point heavy carries like Imbibe de Lune or Sealer. So Lingsha is mostly a better character than Gallagher, which is to be as expected since she is a limited 5-star in the same niche. If you're pulling for Firefly, which I'd assume most people who are considering pulling are, it's looking at whether you want to maximize the team. The premium Firefly team with Gallagher is perfectly fine for clearing content. Damage and sustain hasn't been an issue so far. If you want more comfortable clears and some more damage, then Lingsha is a perfectly valid pull over Gallagher. If you want to make your Firefly team more capable at clearing pure fiction without having to slot someone like Himiko in, then Lingsha is going to be a really good pull. For people who play follow-ups and don't have Aventurine and don't really want to pull him in the future, then Lingsha is going to be a great option there as well. As a generic sustain, Lingsha is still good. She's going to make your life a lot more comfortable, she's going to keep your teams alive. But personally, I wouldn't recommend pulling a sustain unit like Lingsha, who has teams that she specializes in and has offensive capabilities in, to specifically play her outside those teams, but that's up to you. And finally, if you're someone who is theorizing that there's too many summon things being introduced and it's looking kind of reminiscent of when Harmony MC and the Watchmaker relics got introduced back in early Penacony, and you want to put your stonks in a summon meta coming soon, then Lingsha with her bunny Furan, I would think, would be the perfect sustain for that team. Best of luck if you are pulling, and I'll catch you guys next time.